Searches for truck driving jobs were up in March and April. This increase in activity is hitting right as the competition for drivers is beginning to heat up. More and more companies are now offering sign-on bonuses again to entice drivers to choose their fleet over the competition. And as the driver market heats up, the freight market enters uncertainty as forecasts are being downgraded in the wake of the ongoing trade and tariff battle with China. Jason Miller will touch on the tariffs a little more in our monthly update later in our show. Plus, we'll take a look at the newest driverless truck to hit the road in Texas. All that and more on this edition of the 30-Day Reset. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the May 2025 edition of the 30-Day Reset. For Randall Reilly, I'm Joshua Miller. Our show brings all the data you need to navigate and effectively recruit and hire into one place each and every month. We'll go over recruiting numbers, freight data, and take a look at the economic implications and talk about that driverless truck in our news story of the month. And don't forget, everything we go over in today's show, plus an even deeper dive into the numbers and data, is available for you for free down below the video player on our Randall Reilly site, or if you happen to be watching us over on YouTube, you can find that link down in the description. And speaking of YouTube, if that's where you happen to be watching our show and you haven't already, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss out on a new edition of the 30-Day Reset or any of our other video content like Digging Deeper and the Recruiting Roundup. Now, let's dig into the data. First up, it's Trucking by the Numbers, brought to you by Stratas. Our data shows the job posting activity was on the rise throughout the month of March. This comes after the number of truck driver job posts in February rose by 16% and job seekers increased by 3%. As the competition for drivers and interest in the jobs begins to intensify, fleets are starting to more readily offer sign-on bonuses again to try and entice drivers to choose them over their competitors. We've seen not only the number of posts mentioning sign-on bonuses begin to creep up, but the median sign-on bonus amount has also increased to levels not seen since Q2 of 2024. On the search side of the equation, we saw a 5% rise in activity for truck driving job searches in March, and that number held fast through April. With that, the search volume over the past 2 months has hit the highest level seen since last August. Lead costs were down 3% in March, and when it's all said and done, the final figures could be a 10% drop for April. This comes as the higher cost for company drivers decreased again in April after dropping by 9% in March. Owner-operator hire costs, which had seen the average CPH at its lowest level in almost 5 years, however, shot up 21% in the month of March. Overall freight market conditions have begun to turn negative. FTR is also pushing its positive forecast for sustained recovery all the way into 2026 in light of the current and ongoing tussle over trade and tariff levels between the U.S. and China. Now, if a deal is struck and a new agreement is actually reached, however, those forecasts could be adjusted once again. Now, when it comes to the freight overall load activity, well, that held relatively steady from a weekly perspective, but it was up 18% year over year, although down 21% when you consider the 5-year average. For spot rates, there was an increase of 6% year over year and a 1% dip when you compare that to the 5-year average. By the segments, we saw dry van loads and spot rates both inch up 1% year over year, while refrigerated saw gains of 5.5% year over year for load volume and 3% for rates. And flatbed loads jumped 28% year over year and 6% year over year for rate totals. Well, that's going to do it for this month's look at the data. Now, let's dig into this month's news story. Aurora Innovation, Inc. has announced that it has successfully launched its new commercial self-driving truck service in Texas for freight deliveries between Dallas and Houston. So far, over 1,200 driverless miles have already been logged, making Aurora the first company to operate commercial self-driving heavy-duty trucks on public roads. CEO and Aurora co-founder Chris Urmson had this to say: "We founded Aurora to deliver the benefits of self-driving technology safely, quickly, and broadly. Now, we are the first company to successfully and safely operate a commercial driverless trucking service on public roads." Aurora's Aurora Driver is an SAE L4 self-driving system. Launch customers included Uber Freight and Hirschbach Motor Lines. The company says the system is equipped with sensors that can see more than 400 yards ahead. And since the launch of supervised pilot hauls, Aurora Driver has delivered over 10,000 customer loads, covering 3 million autonomous miles. For more on this story, as well as other driver and trucking topics, you can head over to truckersnews.com. Now let's check in with our good friend Jason Miller for his latest take on the economy.
Welcome everyone to our late April, early May update. The big thing right now is we're staring in the transportation space and looking out to what's going to happen in May. Is kind of first off, we've had too many indicators flashing red that we are about to see a substantial decline in containerized imports to the U.S. due to the tariffs, especially on China. And so just opening and looking at what ports are going to be the most affected, certainly Los Angeles and Long Beach jump out on top of the list in terms of just the incredible amount of Chinese imports that enter in through them, as well as China's share of their total imports. Now, this is on a metric tonnage basis, which is the closest way to approximate sort of physical container capacity based off of Census Bureau data. So the West Coast ports, we're starting to anticipate effects first and second weeks of May. Maybe then towards mid-May when we start to see more of the effects on the East and the Gulf Coast ports due to the longer transit times. And taking a look, for example, in a deep dive into Los Angeles, because again, that's by far the largest port for Chinese imports to enter the U.S. What we see is those top import categories. It's stuff like tricycles and scooters and household and toilet articles of plastics and table and kitchenware, and exercise equipment, metal and wood furniture, and things of that sort. That's the type of stuff we're anticipating to see the biggest declines for imports. Much less so, let's say, things like auto parts, because if you're an automaker, as much as you may not want to pay a high tariff, you're going to bring in those brakes, because if you don't do that, you don't have a vehicle. So we're anticipating the bigger drop in the consumer type of goods, the kids' toys, the household furniture, exercise equipment, tableware, kitchenware, etc. So that is certainly not a good sign. And when you look at the share of those imports that China accounts for Los Angeles, you can't make these volumes up elsewhere. So there's no way you're going to magically start sourcing tricycles and scooters from somewhere else in the world and make up for this sheer volume of goods that come in. Now, compounding this is we've seen Federal Reserve manufacturing surveys have shown the momentum for new orders, which is pointing quite positive back in January and even in February, has plunged down to some of the lowest readings since the onset of the COVID pandemic. And so, unfortunately, this does appear to also mean domestic manufacturers as a whole are seeing weakening demand. And so you combine those two things together, and it is certainly a discouraging picture for what freight demand is going to look like in May and June. And especially that June month has always been kind of a critical pre-4th of July buildup. Things slow in July, then pick up August through October, and then they're going to cool down again. So right now, we're not seeing very many positive signs, but we also are waiting to see potential additional changes in tariff policy, so stay tuned for those.
Well, thank you so much for that, Jason. We appreciate your time and expertise on the issues. Now, if you'd like to take a closer look at any of the charts Jason was referring to there in his update, those can be found in May's 30-day reset download, which again is available down below. You can also find a contact link, the link to that trucker's news story on Aurora, and a link to find out more about Stratas down there. That's going to do it for this edition of the 30-day reset. But we'll be back again next month with another update on all the data you need. Until then, thanks for watching.